Shades up.
Okay,
We're live?
we're live.
Good morning, everybody. We apologize for the technical delays, but I think we're up and live now. My name is David Fong, and I am the Communications Director for Troy City Schools. And I'm here this morning with Superintendent Chris Piper. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. Hopefully you've got a lot of questions for us this morning. We know that a lot of people have a lot of questions and some concerns, and we just want to talk about what the 2021 school year might look like. We know what we know, and we know what we don't know, and we're going to share what we have. So, Superintendent Piper, if you could, first of all, kind of talk about the way things ended the school year and what we learned and what we hope to use in the upcoming year, possibly.
Sure. The end of the school year was certainly an interesting one. It was pretty unprecedented that we would end school early, essentially a whole quarter early, and convert entirely to online learning. So I was really proud of the work we did, bringing teachers and staff together to plan for that quick transition. I thought we carried it out relatively quickly and seamlessly, and it certainly wasn't perfect, and we certainly have a lot to learn from that, but our focus throughout that was making sure that we had connection with our students, that we continued to care for them, to check in on their well-being, and also to provide education. And that was challenging because we knew that certain students would have more difficulty than others in an environment like that. To help meet those needs for that kind of learning environment, we provided Chromebooks to any student who needed them. So we eventually ended up passing out 1,600 Chromebooks to students district-wide, and our tech department did a fantastic job getting those devices ready and getting them out to people really quickly. So that was a major undertaking. And then just the shift that teachers had to make from in-person, in-class learning to completely online learning was a remarkable shift, and it's a very challenging undertaking, but they performed very well. Again, we certainly have a lot to learn from that and some improvements to make there, but really proud of the work that was done and how they all came together. And we understood as well that it was challenging for parents at home, parents who continue to work through the shutdown, parents who were home with their children. We fully understand that parents aren't teachers and that it's challenging to teach, and we understood the stresses that might cause for a family. And we heard from parents, some who were disappointed with the lack of volume, and others who were overwhelmed by the volume. So I think it was, it certainly wasn't perfect, but it was very good overall, and again, very proud of how we came together and got that done. Also, graduation came off seamlessly. I thought we did a very nice job with that, and we've worked very closely with the Miami County Public Health Department to get these things done.
And almost 37,000 meals we distributed, breakfasts and lunches for students who needed them. So
yes,
we're pretty proud of that too.
Very proud of that effort.
Obviously. Yes. Before we jump in and talk about the upcoming year, we'd like to point out we are on Facebook Live, so if you have any questions, Mark Barhorse is behind the camera, and he's going to be taking any of your questions, and we know there'll probably be a lot that you have, so we're looking forward to answering them this morning. As we jump into the 2021 school year, talk a little bit about kind of the procedures that we have to follow, what we have to do, and who we have to answer to.
Yeah, so there's a couple of answers to that. Of course, we have a lot of local decision-making authority with our local Board of Education, and we work closely with our school board to work through these issues, to talk about, for example, the school calendar. So we have a lot of local control, but there are limits certainly to that local control. We also have to work under the guidelines of the Ohio Department of Education, and always, but especially now, the Ohio Department of Health. And that typically comes through the form of their guidelines, and then that's passed down to the county level. So we have been working very closely with Miami County Public Health. Miami County Public Health has been the one to approve our graduation plan, for example. Our athletes are beginning to work out. It looks very different. They're all outside, they're socially distanced, but it's good to get them back together in some way. So all of those decisions have to go through Miami County Public Health, and they've been a great partner with us, and they're certainly stretched thin at this time right now too, but it's a good working relationship.
Tell us a little bit about what we do know, what we anticipate. And I know this may be brief. I don't know if people who have been paying attention to the governor's press conferences know, but we've been following along, and sometimes that's where our information comes from as well.
Yeah, we often, we don't have a pipeline of information that brings it to us faster than anyone else, unfortunately. Actually, the day that I learned that school was going to close, I was in a meeting at Van Cleve with teachers there when I found out that school was closing. So I often have to watch the governor's talks to find out what's happening as well. And speaking of that, I was watching. We had heard recently that June 1st or thereabouts, the governor was going to make an announcement regarding school next fall, because we weren't sure at that point, and still aren't today to some degree, sure what next fall would look like. We kind of suspected that we would be back in session next fall, but this past Tuesday on the 2nd, Governor DeWine did announce, I think the words he used were he fully intended for school to be in session this fall. So it wasn't definitive, and I think he's hedging that a little bit because there's the potential for an outbreak again this summer. But I think our planning right now is that we will plan to be in session next fall. We probably think, or we do think, that school is going to look different than it does normally. It probably won't be a regular return to school with some of the guidelines that I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But we do fully expect, and by the way, really have a strong desire to be back in session.
We have a question or more of a concern. They said they can barely hear you. We don't have microphones, so you guys just need to speak up a little bit louder.
I will speak up louder and try to speak directly to the camera more.
Everybody at Facebook, on Facebook Live, please let me know if that's helpful.
All right, well then, no one's ever accused either one of us of being particularly quiet, so hopefully everyone can hear us a little better now, and hopefully we're getting through. Talk a little, we'll kind of go through, we've got a checklist here, and we'll go through some things. But in general, what are some of the general things people might be able to expect with the coming school year?
I think what they can come to expect, certainly, is that first and foremost, we're going to make sure that we protect, to the best of our ability, protect the health and safety of our staff and students. So that's going to be first and foremost for us. We understand that this global pandemic is not over. We understand that coronavirus is going to be with us at the start of school next year. And we understand that we have a duty to protect our staff and our students, particularly those who have health concerns. So you'll see certainly increased sanitation and hygiene. You'll see more education and more action in school with regards to our students and hand washing or hand sanitizing. There's a couple of big challenges for us. Social distancing is going to be a significant challenge in school, but we'll have to work out procedures in terms of, desk arrangements, markings on the floor, markings in the hallway, just how we operate a school, how we move through a hallway between classes. We'll have to be very careful and thoughtful about how we do that in a way that we can still social distance to keep our staff and students safe.
Right. One of the things that a lot of people are talking about, and I know that's going to come up, so we may as well just kind of address it right now, is face masks. Yeah. It's been, to some people, a controversial issue. It's what is our policy going to be on that, or what do we even know we might be able to do with that?
Well, it probably won't be our policy. The honest answer to that is right now, we don't know. Recently, the Ohio Department of Education, let me back up a little bit. With the governor's announcement this week that school would reopen, what is supposed to follow that very shortly are guidelines from the Ohio Department of Education. I expected those, I'm a bit disappointed. I thought those guidelines would be out the day of his announcement, but they aren't there yet. I checked again this morning, and those guidelines still are not there. I don't know. In the draft guidelines that were created a few weeks ago, there was a requirement for face masks. Now, there's been a lot of backlash publicly for the governor for that. I think his initial announcement for the reopening of businesses included a requirement for customers to wear face masks, that he rolled that back. So I was looking again yesterday and didn't see anything clear beyond that initial draft with regard to face masks. So at this point, we don't know if they will be recommended or required. I won't speculate as to what I think it's going to be because I just don't know. We do know, and I was a little bit surprised, but we did know from our survey initially that we sent out to parents that a pretty strong reaction to that on both sides. Some people feel very strongly that face masks should be required, and some people feel very strongly that face masks should not be required. And just logistically, we completely understand the difficulties that face masks can present to a teacher teaching class all day, to a student who is younger, and unfortunately the buildings that we operate in can be very warm, especially when the weather remains hot. That's a real concern. We have, I've been here 2 years, and each year so far we have had to cancel school due to heat. So that's a real concern, and it's challenging, especially for the teacher of a young student or a lower grade level to monitor face mask usage and social distancing.
There's a question, let me back up here. There's a question, so if face masks are required, would there then be a waiver accepted for those who don't want them, similar to vaccination waivers?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. Again, we have some local discretion, but we also operate under the guidelines of the Ohio Department of Education, who, by the way, provides nearly half of our funding. And we also have to work within the guidelines of Miami County Public Health. So I just honestly don't know the answer to that.
There's another question, it's a little bit different, but you referred to the survey that we did. Will those survey results be made public? Would just be interesting to see how our community feels.
I hadn't intended to make them public. It was really information gathering for me to figure out what we needed to do as we plan forward to next year. The reason for the survey, the main reason for the survey was to get a sense of how many parents, because we know that there are a significant number, but how many parents are just frankly afraid to maybe send their children back to school, whether face masks are or are not required. And I've seen, here's the answer to that question. No, I can't share those survey results because there's some private information in there. There's information that people have shared about health concerns. So to share that publicly would be a FERPA violation. So no, I can't share that. But that's what we're seeing from folks, is that some have a concern about a health condition either they have in their family or their child has, and they just have concerns about sending their child back to school. So the intent for the survey was for me to get a sense of how many parents, whether we return next year in a blended way or return full-time or don't return at all, how many parents have an interest in having their child continue to participate online, fully online. So that was the intent of that survey. And that response was pretty strong. I think last time we looked, we had over 200 students that were interested in that. I think I need to clarify that survey a little bit, maybe send out a follow-up to make sure that parents understand where we are today and what we do and do not know, so they can make an informed decision. But as a district, we just have to start planning. If we're going to move 200 students to fully online, we have to figure out how to staff that and how to just get that set up and rolling. So,
Right.
That was a long answer to a short question.
Talk a little bit, we talked about, you said blended school days. Explain to people what, they probably don't know. I mean, obviously what the name kind of implies, but what might blended school days look like for us if we go that option?
So a blended school day means that it would be partially in person and partially online. The buzzwords right now are synchronous and asynchronous learning. So the reason for a blended school day approach is the social distancing. With the number of students we have in our schools, in our classrooms, we cannot achieve social distancing with 30 students in a classroom. Classrooms vary in sizes, but we can probably have between 13 to 15 or maybe 18 students in a classroom in some of the larger ones. So we simply cannot possibly have all of our students in our school in a given day to provide education with social distancing. So to accommodate that, we may have to look at a schedule, and this is what superintendents around the state are talking about. We may have to look at a schedule that's blended, whereas a student would come to school on certain days, be online in certain days, but throughout the in-person and online learning, those would all be directed by the classroom teacher. Students would have the opportunity to be in school, to have the teacher coach alongside them and work with them directly, and also learn in that online environment as well.
Right, and a lot of people, when we talk about social distancing, there's a lot of things that go into it, not just in the classroom. There's busing, there's a school cafeteria, there's a school playground. talk about some of those things and how important those are as well if we're going to talk about maintaining social distancing.
Yeah, busing is a real challenge and one of the real hurdles for a return to school with social distancing. The guidance kind of changes, and it hasn't been finalized yet. We were initially hearing that it was 9 students per bus. Now our buses are, in some cases, 72 passenger buses. So if you can imagine how long it would take us to bus students to school if we only had 9 on a bus, we would bus students all day long, and then by the time we got done, it'd be time to return them home. So that's a real challenge. The latest guidance I've heard is that we're probably looking at 1 student per seat on a bus against the window. Unless they live in the same household, then they can sit in the same seat. Now, please understand that all the things we're talking about right now, these aren't finished decisions. These aren't final decisions. This is just where things stand currently, the conversations I've been involved in and what I've heard from people. So right now we're looking at probably 1 student on a seat. I've referred to this guidance from ODE a couple times, and we have another chat tonight at 7 p.m. for folks who couldn't make this one, and there's a possibility that guidance will come out today. I'm watching for it every day. So tonight's chat might be identical. If the guidance comes out today, we'll have a little more meat to it. But as soon as we know what next year is going to look like and what those guidelines are, we will certainly share that with folks as soon as we know it.
There is one question and a couple statements. You seem to strike a nerve when you said masks may be required. I think you can answer this one. Won't be sending my child to school wearing a mask. I don't believe they need to suffer from CO2 poisoning because some of the people are afraid of this BS virus, and a blended school is bogus. Either send them or don't. So we can only do what we can do. But there was a question about a medical need. If they can't wear a mask, will there be medical exemptions to any requirement to wear a mask?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, if there would be exemptions for that, which is, again, we know we have a duty to educate kids. We're trying to set systems up to provide that education in different fashions. We know that some people feel strongly about face masks. That is why, if parents feel strongly, we want to provide a quality learning experience for our kids. And if that is completely virtual, then we need to do the best we can to make sure that that's a quality education for our kids. Again, we want our students back in school. In school is where they learn best, and we look forward to their return to school. We can't wait until we have a regular return to school. Again, we do have the ability to make some local decisions, but that full return, unrestricted, is not going to be a local decision. That's going to be determined by the governor's office potentially, Ohio Department of Health, again, the Ohio Department of Education, who provides half of our funding. We can't operate with half of our funding missing. And we also have to follow guidelines of Miami County Public Health, just as local businesses have to do the same to remain open. So there are systems we have to work within.
There's another question. Is distance learning going to happen for those who want it?
Yes. We do know that a significant number of parents, regardless of what the start to school looks like, want to keep their children online for whatever reasons. And again, we know there's a need there, and we have to provide for that need, so we will be working for that this summer. That was, again, the reason why I sent out that initial survey, was to try to get a handle on how many people wanted that, because we have to begin staffing that and training those teachers to do that, and we need to know that sooner rather than later. Believe me, I'm awaiting this guidance more than anyone is, because we have to start planning. I mean, it's only June 4th, but it's already June 4th. That's correct, right? Today's 4th?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
They're starting to run together, I think, for everybody. Do we have any more questions right now?
There's a question about what about kids in special learning classes, kids on IEPs?
Yeah, we've talked about that. So students on IEPs, for those who don't know, an IEP means an individualized education plan. And it should be just that. It is, what is the plan for that child with their unique needs, and what does the school do to meet those needs? So we know that we have a responsibility to meet those student needs. Typically, students with IEPs have an annual meeting to review their IEP, so I anticipate we're going to have lots of meetings with lots of parents to talk about their specific child's needs, and it's our duty and our responsibility to meet those needs. So we'll be working hard, even if they are fully online. If they need speech therapy services, we need to find a way to meet that need.
There are a couple questions about extending the school day and daycare and childcare for kids. I'll read the one. Would the school district be capable of extending time during school hours daily to incorporate a blended environment where they could have all the students there daily? For example, half-day kindergarten program structure so all students were there daily for a half day. And then there was another kind of, in my opinion, a related question. I know there isn't enough child care providers before the pandemic occurred. How will parents be able to have their child attend blended school days, work, and have safe child care?
That's a valid question and a real concern, and there's no easy answer for that. We currently don't provide child care in school. We educate students in a school environment. We don't have the physical space to offer school and also child care at the same time. And in terms of what the school day would look like, it's a possibility. The challenge with that, I think it kind of sounds like running 2 shifts of education, which is possible, but would probably require us to hire twice the staff, and we certainly couldn't absorb that cost. So we're looking for options and what that calendar might look like. We'll be working closely with our Teachers Association and our Board of Education to create a calendar that provides as much in-person learning opportunity as possible, but we also have fiscal restraints as well. Folks may have seen that this current fiscal year, because of the coronavirus, the district lost $900,000 approximately in state funding because of the state income tax receipts being down. We don't know yet what next year's funding looks like. We don't know how deeply our funding will be affected by the state of Ohio. The speculation that I'm hearing so far is pretty dire. Ohio's tax collections are severely down because people are unemployed, and that the casinos were shut down, the lottery has been less, and all of those things go into our funding formula. We never know on an annual basis what our funding is going to look like until we get it, and this year that's particularly scary.
Kind of on a related note, with the governor cutting school funding and the possibility of changes of school, will there be staffing cuts?
We hope not. We're trying hard right now to plan as best possible for next year and to not have to look at cuts in staff that are going to affect student programs. We are hopeful that the cuts, Ohio does have a rainy day fund of $2.7 billion, and we know that they're certainly going to tap into that rainy day fund next year. They didn't do that with this fiscal year with the recent $900,000 cut to Troy City schools. That was the governor's decision to hold that rainy day fund intact so that he could apply the full effect of it next fiscal year. So we're very hopeful that will be the case and that the economy will recover quickly and that we get back to business as usual and that rainy day fund can kind of keep us all afloat. We just don't know. And without knowing, so the answer is no, we don't intend right now to cut staff unless we can in some way where people are leaving through attrition, if they're retiring or just leaving on. We have to look at each position carefully to see if we're going to replace it, but we do not intend to RIF people, which is a reduction in force, at this time.
On a somewhat related note, and back to what you said earlier about the survey, you said there were 200 students that were interested in online learning. And then she asked this twice. Then she asked, how is that significant with a district this size? So how is I'll read her exact last comment. You said it was only 200. How is 200 significant for the entire district?
That's a significant number of students. Our total population is approximately 4,200. So what is that, 8% maybe or something like that? It's 200 students is a significant number of students.
But you didn't get I guess what I was kind of fishing towards is you didn't get a response from 100% of our families.
Correct.
You got, of the people that responded, about what percentage of people were interested in online school?
Oh, okay. So we had, at last check, we had 795 responses. from parents. We tried to clarify the survey a little bit, and I think we probably could have done a better job with this. We intended for folks to answer that survey who did have an interest in online learning. So we didn't ask everyone to fill it out, although everyone could. We got 795 responses. Of those 795 responses, at last check there were 168 parents that indicated they would like their child to learn online. Some of those parents have multiple children, so it was over 200 students total.
So about a quarter of our population, based on that survey.
About 22% of those who responded.
Are we looking at pushing the start date back at all? Currently, we are scheduled for mid-August.
We have talked about that. We have, because school is going to look different next year in this blended environment, we have a lot of work to do with our staff to get them up to speed with how to instruct in that kind of environment. There's a lot of professional learning that has to take place. And also, if we do have some of these restrictions and concerns, it'd probably be wise to push back the start of school so that we could get through some of the hotter weather.
We hope.
Maybe push it back until after Labor Day. That's a possibility. We also, one of the things that we really have to be focused on next year is the learning. Our students just missed out on an entire quarter of an academic year. Yes, we provided online instruction. Yes, our teachers did a great job, but that was not a substitute for what they missed. So we know that we have a lot of work to do at the start of next school year to see where our kids are in their learning, to understand what gaps there are, so that we can be really precise and careful to make sure that we fill those gaps so that students don't fall behind. That's one of our biggest concerns. So we're probably going to have a significant amount of work to do at the start of next school year, just to diagnose our students with some different tools and just see where they are in their learning so we can be focused on that.
There's a question about some of the non-core subjects. What about things like gym, recess, music, art, etc.? Social distancing will affect all of those inside school.
Social distancing is going to affect all of those activities, all of our classrooms, whether it's a math classroom, whether it's a band environment, whether it's an art class, it's certainly going to affect those. Our intention is to get our staff together, to get our department heads together, and to talk about what does physical education look like in a socially distanced environment. How can they accomplish that? How do they share equipment when they're able to share equipment? Those kinds of things. So we intend to bring our staff together and to start answering those questions.
Have you considered using larger areas such as the gyms, cafeteria, auditorium, and possibly other locations such as Hobart Arena to use as classrooms in order to have more space for desks?
I think we have to do all the above. Again, that's a challenge in light of the previous question, which is about PE, art, and those kinds of things. So typically gymnasiums are used for PE class. So it's a possibility. We can't use some spaces. We can't use hallways and those kinds of things. There are fire regulations we have to follow. But I think we have to look creatively at all of our spaces and see how many students we can fit in and is it conducive to a math class to teach in the gymnasium? Maybe the answer to that's yes, and I think we have to look at all of that.
There's a handful of comments I'm scrolling through that are frustrated with how online learning went this spring. I'll just leave it at that. There's not really a question, just more statements.
Yeah, and I kind of spoke to that before. The overwhelming response we got from folks was a very positive one. Most people were very appreciative of the efforts. Again, what we had to do in a very short time, and when I say short, I mean a couple of days, we had to completely transform education from in-class learning to completely online. And there are probably many people watching this Facebook feed right now who have different levels of technology ability.
As evidenced by our struggles to get online on time. Sometimes even we struggle with it.
So for some staff members, that transition was harder than others. So, but we did it the best we could. It wasn't perfect. Certainly, we have a lot to learn from that. And the next product we put out there needs to be a lot better. But we did. You're right. We did hear concerns from folks. And again, some of the concerns were that the workload was too much and it was just too much to handle at home, and they'd had enough. And we heard an equal amount of people say that it wasn't enough. So trying to find that balance is different for each family probably, as they're facing different things at home. But
Kind of on a related note, to make your point, Will parents who are doing distance learning be able to weigh in on what programs, websites, etc. are used for their child/children? Obviously, we've seen what works for their child during the past few months, so they will be able to work together to create a plan, or should those parents not do Troy's plan but opt for homeschooled?
Well, I would certainly encourage them to do what Troy is offering. And we always want to hear from our parents. Education for any child should be a partnership between the school and the parent. So certainly, when I was a classroom teacher, I would love to hear recommendations from a parent about what worked for their child. So not just in light of what we're facing next fall, but please always reach out to your child's teacher and share what you think works for your child. But it's our intention to, homeschooling is difficult. It's our intention to be as present and as impactful as we can, and I think that we can do a great deal towards that with whatever we put out there next fall.
There is maybe a little more clarification. There's a question. We went from 8% to 22%. I think they're referring to the number of people who are interested in online. If you could clarify how that 8% turned into 22%.
Yeah, so 22% of respondents to the survey indicated a desire for online learning, but not everyone responded. So I was probably doing some pretty bad math. Again, we had over 200 students out of 4,200 total students. So again, 22% of respondents indicated a desire for online learning, but not everyone responded. We only had 795 respondents, but I'm not sure how many parents, we have 4,200 students. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Will you guys have cuts to any music programs or sporting events?
First of all, we don't know yet if sporting events are going to happen. So we anticipate that they will. I think there's a 3-phase plan. Right now we are in phase 1. And as we work up through the phases, it becomes less restrictive. I think what happens, a lot of people have asked me, will you play football next year? We don't know at this point. We certainly want to. We are anticipating that we will. But I think to some degree that depends on what happens this summer as restrictions get loosened. Will there be additional outbreaks? And what we're probably going to see next year with education and everything is that today's reality depends on where we are with numbers of coronavirus positive tests and deaths. So I think it's possible next year that we're going to see periods of time where we are shut down because of a local outbreak and then we're back open again. We're all going to have to be very flexible and fluid. But directly to answer the question about music and sports, I think it was the question, we want to have all those programs intact and happening as they were before all this happened.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody in the city of Troy who's more looking forward to a high school football season and a high school athletics season more than I am.
I think what I heard currently was that marching band could march in practice, but they can't use instruments at this point. So we would love for them to be able to start using their instruments.
Yeah, again, we can't point out enough that nobody wants school to be as normal and a return to normal as much as we do. It's why we got into this business, and it's what we love doing. But there are guidelines that we have to follow. Correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
A lot of them.
Here's a question about the guidelines.
Uh-huh.
What science, in all capital letters, is behind these new guidelines? More and more studies, Sweden, Austria, etc., are being released showing children are not in danger. As leadership for Troy schools, are you accepting what is being mandated from the state as necessary? Are you trying to have a voice in the decision-making process, and in what ways?
Oh, we're certainly trying to have a voice in the decision-making process. Since this pandemic hit, we've had a weekly series of meetings with local legislators. So superintendents across the state, here locally, myself here in Troy, we are meeting with local legislators. Just last week, we had a meeting with Senator Huffman, Representative Powell, and an aide from Warren Davidson's office to talk about these issues, to share our concerns, to share our desires. So we are working quite closely with them. The governor does have a superintendent task force that he's put together. I'm not a part of that, but we do have representation there as well. We also have I have a professional association as a superintendent. It's called the Buckeye Association of School Administrators. We are also meeting weekly. The purpose of that weekly talk is so that we can share our concerns, our feelings, our thoughts about the return to school, and that our professional association can take that collectively from across the state of Ohio to apply, I guess, pressure, for lack of a better word, on our behalf for what it is we want to see in our schools. So we certainly have an avenue for that. I can't tell you there's not some frustration on the part of many people, but a lot of what's happened has come from the governor's office and from Dr. Acton and the Ohio Department of Health, and in times like this, they have a significant amount of control. So yes, we're making our voice heard and being a part of the process. And
Kind of along that lines, what is the best way to offer feedback and ask questions? How do we contact? Email, call?
if they mean contact us,
I think they mean the decision maker, the state,
okay.
those people.
I would encourage folks to reach out to their local representatives. Senator Huffman has an office that he can be reached. Jenna Powell can be reached. The governor's office directly, the Ohio Department of Education. The Ohio Department of Education, their task, and the State Board of Education, their task is to take the guidelines given to them from the Ohio Department of Health and work within those guidelines to provide education for students. They're not a decision maker when it comes to matters of health. So it depends on what their concern is. If the concern is education because of these guidelines, they should contact the Ohio Department of Education or the governor's office. If their question are the guidelines themselves, I would encourage them to contact directly the Ohio Department of Health. So it just depends on what their concern is, but we probably could be helpful in putting that information on our website.
Yes, we will have that up there.
So we can have information on our website for how to contact local representatives here for the state, our national representatives, as well as the governor's office, the Ohio Department of Health, and Ohio Department of Education.
Sure. You can get that up
And if
there.
it's a local question, they're of course always welcome. I always say it, my phone doesn't ring often enough. They're always welcome to call us, email. There's a very simple email, info@troycityschools.org.
And that all funnels to the same place, and that's a valuable email to have regardless of any questions you might have, because we can direct them to the right people who can best answer them.
Correct.
There's a number of comments along the lines of the results you got or the comments you got in the survey saying that we want our kids in school all day, every day. Sorry, we got an incoming call. All day, every day, or nothing. We shouldn't wear masks. What's the solution there? If it's a requirement for every public school to wear a mask, the other option is then don't go to public school and do an online program. Is that basically your option?
Those are basically the options. As public schools, again, we do have a significant amount of local control with certain issues. This is probably not going to be within our local control. Again, the guidelines are not out yet. When they come out, they may say required. They may also say recommended. So I just don't know the answer to that. But we are required to operate within the guidelines that we are given. If those guidelines say that face masks are required, again, half of our funding comes from the Ohio Department of Education, and we cannot forego half of our funding. We cannot operate without 50% of our funding. On the other side of that, there's the regulatory work of the Miami County Public Health Department. If the guideline is that we are required to do it, just like any local business, they have the authority to shut us down. So we can't just choose because we don't like the requirements. That is why it is our job to educate all kids with all needs. That is why we are trying to put together, we are putting together a completely online platform, and it's going to be the highest quality we can make it, and I'm very hopeful and confident that's going to be a good product. It's not going to be perfect, but again, even in that online environment, we want partners we want to partner with parents to educate their children. We're going to have staff that are dedicated to that work. We certainly share the sentiment that we want all of our kids back every day. There's a lot of learning that needs to take place, and that happens best when they're in school.
Kind of the piggy tailer on that, there's a comment here, kind of a comment on how the online learning, the online platform was this spring. Would have been easier if there was a more seamless platform for all students having a similar way to access and receive online instruction, asking for parent feedback.
Completely agree. In fact, we're looking at a learning management system right now that will do just that. There will be a one-stop shop for parents and for teachers and for students that would make all that much, much easier.
And just to clarify, talk about the time frame that we had this spring. I hear we talk about, this is something we had hoped to do in maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
We ended up doing it in 5 days.
If you would have told me 6 months ago that we were going to completely change how we deliver instruction in 2 days, I would have thought that you're really funny. But that's essentially what we did. We went from school as we all know it to a complete virtual experience for all teachers and all kids. And again, that certainly wasn't perfect, but I am very proud of the work we did. We have a lot to learn from that. And we transformed education overnight. And it's going to be a very busy summer here in central office as we try to work through these guidelines and plan for next school year. These are the same conversations being had in every school district around us. I was on a state superintendent's call yesterday with nearly 200 state superintendents from across the state of Ohio, and we're all trying to answer these same questions. Just like we have put out this information about an online platform, I've seen other districts around the state do the same thing. We're all trying to prepare to offer the best education we can for our kids.
Completely off change of subject. How will volunteer policies be conducted? How will PTOs be allowed to function? Will events be allowed? All these are questions. My questions seem to be. So volunteers, PTO functions.
Lunch buddies, all those sorts of things.
The draft guidance included a limitation on visitors, so that might be a part of what we're looking at next year. Again, we don't know because those guidelines aren't complete yet, but there is a distinct possibility that there will be a limit on the number of visitors to the school. PTOs do a lot of good work in the school building. In fact, probably do their best work when they're in the building with students and teachers helping, assisting in many different ways. If that's not allowable to the full degree it was last year, there's also a lot of things that PTOs are able to do outside of the school day to support students and staff. So I'm sure that we'll continue to work closely with our PTOs.
Will the 1 day a week gate program at Forrest still take place for elementary students, or will it be cut?
We don't have intentions to cut any kind of service. I want to make that clear. I don't know what school is going to look like next year, let alone what a 1 day a week program. I know that we have a need to serve all of our students' individualized needs, whether those are students with special disabilities, whether those are students that require gifted services, whether those are students who are English language learners. We have a duty to provide all of those services. As we get further into knowing what normal school is going to look like next year, we'll certainly be able to answer those questions better. But the quick answer is, again, we aren't looking at cutting any service to students. We're looking at how can we provide that service to the best of our ability in whatever environment we have to.
I'm going to try and I'll read this question for you. Am I right in understanding if masks are required and there's scheduling that parents can't do because they work, will we be given the curriculum online and assigned a teacher to assist us to do school from home?
We don't, our intention with any online platform is that teachers will be the ones delivering the content, providing the assignments, giving feedback. It has to be a much better and much more engaged product for our students this fall. Last spring was about making sure everyone was okay, making sure that students were engaged as much as possible. It certainly has to be deeper next year. So we want teachers to be teachers. And of course, as parents, I have children myself, and of course we all help our children with their schoolwork at home, but we don't want parents to be the deliverers of instruction. We don't want parents to be the teachers. That's why with our platform, and I think the real benefit to what we can offer is that we're going to have teachers that are playing that role. It's not going to just be software that students have to navigate alone. We want to set platforms up. And there's some of that happens in the high school with different programs, but especially for the lower grades, we want teachers connecting with students directly.
If guidelines say recommended, will Troy recommend but not require, leave it up to parents?
I would assume so, but that's probably a school board level decision to be made, but that would be my assumption.
I'm trying, there's just several comments here and answer, and I appreciate everybody. Some people joined late and they're asking questions that were covered early on, and I appreciate you guys leaving messages that are answering those questions so we don't go back and repeat the same thing over and over.
And also, again, we're going to do this chat twice today. It's probably going to be very similar both times, but we're going to put at least one of the videos on the website for folks that missed it. Go ahead.
Right, and also if you leave your a written comment in the comments section on this video, which we will keep posted on our Facebook page, we can go back and answer those to the best of our abilities.
We can do a FAQ sheet.
Yep.
So folks that have questions that are common, we can put those in a document to put answers out there.
There's a request, I'll read a couple questions here because I think there's some short answers to them. For high school math classes, would the teacher work the problems on video, either live or recorded, so the students can be more, can benefit as if they were in the classroom? Thank you. Then there's another one, what can parents do to help? And finally, are fourth quarter grades going to count towards their overall GPA?
I'll work backwards. So fourth quarter grades from last spring will not count towards their overall GPA. The reason for that is an equity issue. Although we were able to provide all of our students who needed them with the devices, and we believe that all of our students had internet access, or at least those who didn't, we helped them solve that problem. That doesn't mean that everyone has an equal ability to do schoolwork. Whether they're dealing with health problems at home, financial problems at home, just the learning environment at home, it's a matter of equity. So we made the decision that no, fourth quarter grades would not count towards cumulative GPAs. Basically, for a freshman in high school this year, once we return to school, every semester will count except for the second semester of this past school year. The question before that was, there was a question you asked about.
What can parents do to help?
What can parents do to help? Right now, patience is key. I know that there's a lot of frustration because we don't know all these guidelines. Believe me, I share that frustration. I mentioned earlier that it's only June 4th, but it's already June 4th, and we are trying to plan for the start of a school year with a lot of moving parts. How we're going to bus kids, how we're going to staff positions, and we need to get those questions answered very, very quickly. So I will be checking probably several times a day for that final guidance from the Ohio Department of Education, because we know that we have to plan, and we also have to communicate those plans to parents. So the biggest way they can help is patience, trust that we're going to love your kids, and we're going to take care of your kids, and we're going to provide your kids with the best education possible. And the other way they can help is to share concerns, to ask questions when they have them. Again, we're partners with parents for the education of their students.
Then the other question was math teacher putting...
Yeah. So I think that kind of sounds like it's called a flipped classroom model, and I think we have a lot of work to do, a lot of good work to do with that approach. So that kind of idea is that the lecture, the presentation, the demonstration, whether it's a science classroom demonstrating a chemical reaction, or a math teacher demonstrating how to work problems out, that is what students would kind of see at home. They would see the instruction, they would go to watch a video, they would have a video recording from a teacher, they would go read a passage, that's where they would kind of get the content, so that when they're in school, the teacher can help the student with the assignment, to be the coach on the side, and to work through their individual needs and their individual questions. That's kind of the flipped classroom model, and I think kind of that's what that question was getting at.
Do you anticipate daily health screenings and temperature checks being mandatory? Will teachers be responsible for this, or will there be an increase in nursing staff?
We don't know yet. The last guidance that I saw was that the expectation would be that students would check their temperatures at home before they reported to school, and that's kind of like phase one. If there aren't outbreaks, if things are going okay, and again, this could change. But the last I saw was that students were expected to check their temperature before coming to school. We will have thermometers in the office. With fewer students in a given day, it would certainly be easier to check temperatures if we needed to. I'm not sure the logistics of how we will check temperatures if we have to, but if we have to, we will.
If we could go back and touch on the grade point average as well, our intention is to have all the grades published online for parents on Monday. And also, just so there's no surprises when you check those on Monday, as far as grade point averages go, that's really only going to apply to the high school, correct?
Yes, only transcripted courses for the high school level. When we say that transcripted, there are some courses in the junior high that are transcripted for high school credit. Those will get actual grades. Anything from high school course, anything below transcripted credit, so K through most of our 8th grade courses, will be narrative feedback from teachers. More than ever, we need to provide parents with more information than just a letter grade. A letter grade doesn't inform very much. So we've asked our teachers to provide some narrative feedback for parents to talk about what their students learned, what's important for them for their next steps, just to get as much information as possible.
There's a few comments about the survey. When we were talking about that, there were more, and here's another one. Basically getting at, are you planning any more surveys so more people have an opportunity to weigh in?
The previous survey is still open, so people can still go to that, and the answer is yes. We are going to need to know, and I intend to follow these couple of chats up today. Well, again, we'll probably have to do a couple of more chats because we thought going into today that we would have the final guidance.
We set this date with that in mind.
Yeah, we chose the 4th because we thought the governor's announcement on the 1st would include this guidance. So I think once we get the information out there, what the guidance is, because I think a lot of parents are waiting to hear what it is. Once we know what that is, we need to send another survey out because we need to know how many parents want to have their students fully online. How many students, or how many parents want to have the blended, well, if those are the only 2 options. The big deal for us right now is how many fully online so we can start staffing and assembling that.
Here's a great question that will summarize everything that's happened to us so far this spring and what you tried to voice early on.
Okay.
And you won't be able to answer it, but here it is. At what point will there be definitive answers so I know if I need to enroll in homeschool or not?
Well, what I heard yesterday from a person in my professional association was the guidance from the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Department of Education would be out within the next 2 weeks. That sounds like a long time to me. I hope it's today, but again, we need that information as fast as possible to plan. What I'm trying to say also is that homeschooling is an option. I would caution parents to think about that carefully because it may be a lot harder than it sounds. We have trained professionals here that are going to offer in-person blended learning probably in the schools, and we're also going to have those same licensed professionals who are going to be offering online education that will be a good product.
I understand that field trips will not take place. Is that mainly because of busing? Many trips to outdoor venues with ample space.
Well, there's 2 answers to why field trips wouldn't take place. One, and the main answer is with a blended model, we are essentially looking at far less time for instruction. We have a lot of academic content to teach in any given year, but especially this year, looking at the learning gaps that are going to result from last spring. So our challenge every single year is how to fit all the content in the time frame we're given. In a blended model with some of our students not in session that day or online, it's going to be far more difficult to teach the content. So we have to be laser focused on what we're doing on a daily basis. Some things have to go as a result, and some of those trips might be the result of that. The other answer to that is, with the coronavirus pandemic and social distancing, it may be unwise of us to take our students out to different locations. If we're having a limitation on visitors, the same sense would apply to taking students to different venues.
Back to what happened this past spring with the online learning. Was there any follow-up with kids that did not check in online?
Definitely. In fact, that was our weekly conversation. We wanted to make sure that all of our students were connected with. And the first line of defense were teachers connecting and engaging with their kids. And then we had weekly reporting from our teachers to our principals and to our guidance counselors, school counselors, for any students that weren't engaged in online learning. So our principals and our school counselors, if students weren't engaged and they heard from teachers, they got involved. And I know on one day, our high school administrators made, I think, 91 phone calls to parents. And most of those parents were surprised to find that their students were not engaged. So that quickly remedied that. And then if we still couldn't get in contact with some families, there were a few, then we employed our school attendance officer and school resource officers just to make sure those students were well. So I thought we did great work last spring with making sure that all kids were accounted for and cared for.
There's a number of comments voicing frustration with online learning, how that's difficult for them. There's not really a question there. There were just statements. Here's a note: the governor canceled today's press conference, so he's not going to tell you anything today. But again, I think you're looking for something from the Ohio Department of Education or the Ohio Department of Health, one of those two.
Yes.
When we talk about keeping kids engaged too, it's just as important that we keep our parents engaged. And we encourage, obviously those of you who are watching have a presence on social media. We encourage people to visit our Facebook page, to visit our Twitter @SchoolsTroy, to visit our website, www.troycityschools.org or www.troy.k12.oh.us. Everything that we're doing here, we're trying to put out there and get the word out. We want to keep parents absolutely engaged in this process, and we want their feedback and their input on this process as well.
There was a question about their son was not challenged at school, but was when the parent was a teacher. I thought that was kind of funny. But so talk a little bit more about the improved platform and how that should be much better than what we had this spring.
Well, the real challenge this spring was how it caught us by surprise. I mean, no one expected in any school, no one expected to leave and to be fully online in a moment's notice. And I think that decision came on a Thursday, and we had school on Friday, and then we were out. So we hadn't prepared for that. I mean, it certainly in my career, we haven't had a global pandemic that closed school. It was unprecedented. So caught us all by surprise. Again, we had a plan to be a one-to-one district, which means every student would have a Chromebook. We didn't have that already in place. So one of the questions is, how are we going to deliver online instruction when we don't know students have devices? So quickly we got 1,600 devices together and passed them out to students that needed them, while we continued to feed people. And then we had teachers. We basically had a week where we had teachers get together and plan lessons and collaborate and talk about what learning objectives they had yet to cover this spring and how they were going to do that. And then we had to have conversations about what is the expectation for students at home and for parents at home with regard to learning. We tried to be kind of uniform as a district for what amount of work is appropriate, what does the work look like. So there were a lot of conversations that had to go into that too, and a lot of planning. The benefit we're going to have to next fall is that we have a great deal much more time to plan. We can get teachers together, and that's why this information is so important for us, because we need to identify how many teachers are we going to need so we can get them together and start building that platform. I think we have a lot of teachers that have learned a lot, certainly, about how to use the technology, what quality learning looks like online, that we can really leverage from our experiences this fall or this spring. But But we need to have time to get that together so that we can make sure, and also to find, I mentioned the learning management system earlier, that one-stop shop for parents, students, and staff to go to. I thought we did a good job with Google Classroom, but Google Classroom is limited to some degree. So I think we're going to have a better product for that, platform for that as well. So,
How about the Washington DC trip? Will it still be happening?
I think our DC trip happens in the spring. This 8th grade class next year will be the first class to take it in 8th grade, so it's our full intention that that would happen. I can't predict what next spring is going to look like. That's 12 months away. It is certainly my hope that we are back to business as usual, so I would anticipate that trip will happen. I think if that doesn't happen, Washington DC is a valuable experience for our students. We want to make sure that trip happens, and I would say at this point, if not next year, then we would try to get them on that trip as soon as possible. But I would anticipate that it will happen next spring.
I'm going to lob this softball up to you.
Okay.
Will you consider regular chats like this over the summer? It seems like a great way to share information, more personal than an email, but also a way for you to hear immediate feedback and take notes, bring to other meetings. The community needs engagement like this.
Definitely. One of the things I've missed through this pandemic is the coffee chats. We were having monthly coffee chats since I've been here, different locations around town. I'm looking forward to getting back to that again, by the way. But definitely, we'll continue to do this probably more frequently than the coffee chats were occurring. I think once a month probably isn't enough. I think that as soon as this guidance comes out from the Ohio Department of Education, it's probably a good idea to do another one. We'll continue to do them at different times of day so that people who work different schedules can view them, and they will also be on our website for folks who can't watch either one. But we certainly want to make sure that people have the information to hear concerns, frustrations, and again, we share a lot of those frustrations, but it's good for us to have these opportunities.
People can look forward to seeing our pretty faces.
At least yours, yes.
There was a question, if masks are required, will teachers be able to have portable air conditioning units?
Portable air conditioning units are a challenge because we don't have the electrical capacity in our buildings to handle that load. Our buildings, we all know the condition of our buildings. We don't have the electrical infrastructure to allow that. Could some have them? Yes. They're not very efficient, but although the system could handle some, it certainly could not handle everyone having those. Which is, again, maybe a reason why we should look to push back the start of school till after Labor Day. I know a lot of districts are doing that already.
And even if we do, I mean, we had a heat index day in October, but at least now we're a little more practiced and a little more nuanced at having them learn from home in that situation.
I think last year we had a heat index day and a snow day within a two week period, I think.
That's correct.
I don't see any more questions coming in. There's just, as I've said before, there's a whole bunch of comments about we just need to return to normal. Very much, a lot of people are very much against masks. I don't think anybody enjoys the idea of wearing a mask, but whether it's required or not, and how can they make their feelings known. We've covered all those things. And then there's some questions or some more comments about online learning and if it would be important for teachers to be available, if you want to talk about that a little bit more for the online platform.
When we say online platform, I mentioned earlier that the best education is going to happen in person in school, and that's because there's no substitute for that connection, that personal connection, that relationship with the student that a teacher has. That's certainly first and foremost for us, and that's certainly a challenge with an online platform. But we need to do everything we can to make sure that relationship is still able to be established electronically. It would be a requirement of our teachers and our students in that kind of platform to have that engagement, to be available to chat directly through video chat or other chat. And I could even see an opportunity where parent-teacher conferences would still happen. We want to make sure people are as engaged as possible always. But that's especially important when we're looking at an online platform.
Distance learners and school lunch. Would that program be available to them to pick up meals either daily or once a week?
That is a great question. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to write that down. School lunch.
We have to talk to Clint about that.
I mean, it'd be our student.
Yeah, they are our student. They would certainly be entitled to that. We would just have to work out the logistics of how to do that. I'm sure it's something we can do. Our food service department is
Best in the state.
They are amazing. They did a fantastic job, and they're great people, and they work hard. So that is a great point. School lunch pickup for online.
She said you're welcome, LOL.
I appreciate it.
Is Troy doing online next year, or is it still being discussed? We answered that already 1,000 times, but go ahead.
We're going to be offering full-time online for those who need it, and as of the governor's decision Tuesday, it looks like schools will be open in a blended way probably next fall.
Here's an access or an equity question. If it's online learning and not everyone has the internet, what can we do?
There are different things we can do, and we need to hear from people that have that situation. I know here locally in town there was a company that was providing, I think, free service for a short period of time. We may be able to leverage some of those local options again this year. It's possible we could look at Wi-Fi hotspots for folks, but anyone who has that issue certainly should reach out to us and let us know, and I think there's things we can do to help accommodate that.
Here's a good summary question, good summary comment that summarizes what a lot of you guys are asking or voicing. I'm trying to figure out how to make blended learning work when my husband and I both work full time.
I'll answer that. And we haven't talked about this yet, but next year, by necessity, Troy City Schools are moving to one-to-one initiative, which means that every student in our schools is going to be given a Chromebook. Every student. Kindergarten students, I think we're looking at iPads for them because younger students at kindergarten age are much more tactile and the screen works better. But this was part of our strategic plan to do this eventually, but because of blended and online learning, that need is immediate. So every student next year will receive a Chromebook that they can take home nightly, that they can bring to school with them, that will be their device to use throughout the school year. So that's something that we have to do because whether they are fully online or blended, they will have a Chromebook to use. Mark, what was the other question? Part of that question?
No, sorry, I was scrolling.
Sorry.
Ahead.
What was the other part of that question?
Parents who work full time.
Again, we understand that. We know that different some students have the good fortune of having a parent who can be there every day and to help them. Some even may have a degree in education, but a lot of students don't have that. So as we build this program, this platform, that's the mindset that we have to have as educators, is that the important part when they're in school is that teachers can work alongside and help develop the skill deficiencies they have and fill those gaps. When students are at home, that is a great opportunity for them to get the content. Again, whether that's a teacher demonstration video, whether that's a teacher chat, whether that's a different video they watch, whether it's some software we can use to provide the instructional part, whether it's a reading passage, or there's so many different options. But that flipped classroom model is getting the content at home, coming back to school for the coaching and the one-on-one here in school.
Are you going to use a uniform curriculum for the district?
We currently do. For example, with K through 6 reading instruction, where the Reader's Workshop model of instruction, our curriculum directors aren't here with me, but I know we have a math platform and program K through 6. So yes, we're providing the curricular resources for our staff as much as possible, and trying to be more uniform as much as possible. That's one of the issues that we were trying to address with our building project, is that we're kind of have individual platforms and programs in different places, and we need to provide equity for all of our students, whatever school they go to, and make sure they have a quality curricular program.
Will the online learning be personalized to the student, gate, or other situations?
Yes.
Can you go more in depth with questions on the next survey? I was unsure how to answer. I was afraid by answering anything except one, my kid was going to be signed up online exclusively. Obviously, as parents, we want to keep our kids and the at-risk population safe. Do you have a plan to switch to online if there is an outbreak in the community?
I think that could be what next school year looks like. Coronavirus is still going to be around when schools open up next fall. So it's very likely that we are in session in whatever blended model that looks like, and that if a student shows symptoms and is tested and shows positive for coronavirus, we would close that school for a few days, and we would sanitize that school, and we would communicate with parents, and we would open that school back up as fast as possible once it had been sanitized and return to learning. It's also possible that that could happen frequently, that one day this elementary is closed and this day the junior high is closed, so that we can do those things, because again, coronavirus is still going to be with us. We have to respond like that. And also it's possible that there could be a local outbreak, and maybe if the health department shuts us down for another 2 weeks and we have to switch to fully online. That's the challenge we're facing, is that we have to be as nimble as possible and prepared as possible for disruptions in learning like that. Now, certainly, we all hope, certainly including us, that we're in school every day, all day as normal, but we have to work to that point. It's our goal to have students in school as much as possible, but also safely.
And that could work the other way as well. You know, hopefully, you know, if positively, if a vaccine or something were to be developed, you know, later in the year, we could come January and say they're fully opened.
Yeah, I think, so the question was about the survey. Yes, the survey was good information, but I think we can design it better, and I need to be more, it's one of the reasons I wanted to have this chat, because when we started to see comments about if face masks are required, then I want to do online learning. That caught me by surprise a little bit. So the next survey, we need to be more clear, and we're going to have to come to a point in time very soon where we kind of have to sign on the dotted line and say, yes, I want my child online learning, so that we can again plan and staff for that need. And I think it probably would be wise of us to approach that by semester, because what we cannot do as a district, we can't assign 5 teachers to teach online, and then parents want to bring them back to in-person school, to school itself. We've assigned staff to do this job, so we have to do this job. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible, but we also have to be realistic. So it might be wise of us to approach this as a semester by semester choice. If a vaccine is available and things are good by next November, and we can return to every day, all day instruction the second semester, well, that would be great.
Here's a question. What do they mean by blended? What's blended learning?
So blended learning means a mix of in-person and online learning. So again, the idea would be that if we have to social distance and we can't have all of our kids in school on any given day or every given day, that we would bring some kids in for in-person learning.
So there's been a number of other comments and questions. I'm going to ask you interject for something you just said.
Sure.
Why would there be a limited number of people in school every day instead of just bringing everybody in every day?
Because if social distancing is a requirement, where we have to have 6 feet between students, we can't physically fit the same number of students in a classroom. We can use other spaces in the building, but we don't have the square footage in a building to have all of our students in there with 6 feet space between them all day long. We just can't physically accommodate that. So if that is part of the guideline, part of the restriction, social distancing, like Mr. Fong and I are right now, then we would bring some of our students in for in-person learning, and the next day, kind of like college courses. A lot of college courses might meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but they do lessons online Tuesday and Thursday. That's what that blended model would look like. It's a blend of in-person and online instruction.
If we could jump back to a previous question, if you filled out the survey, the first survey we had sent out, you're not locked into anything.
Oh, no.
Just so people understand. There will come a point, though, where people will have to make that choice. But today is not that day, and we don't know when that day will come.
Correct.
There's been a number of questions about IEP students. If all grades follow the same curriculum, then what about children that have an IEP? It's not so easy for them. We found that found out this spring are seventh grade math. What are you going to do with those children?
I spoke to this earlier. All of our students with special needs have, when I say special needs, learning disabilities, have an individualized education program plan. That's their IEP. So it is our duty to meet with our parents and our students to review their IEP annually and to talk about what instruction, what their goals are annually. So we will conduct those meetings and we will ensure that we meet the individual needs of all of our special needs students, whether they are students with learning disabilities, whether they are gifted students. Gifted students have a WEP or a written education plan, or whether they are English language learners. We will meet the needs of all of our students regardless of their unique need. So when I say, I want to clarify this, when I say online platform, it's not going to be 100% just software. A key component of that is that teacher connection. We need a teacher assigned to those students that is their teacher.
Here's a question. For the junior high and high school, have you considered shortening the length of each class from 40 minutes to 20 minutes? Some students could go in the morning and others go in the afternoon.
That is a possibility. The challenge with having a half-day program is that it's really, once you have those transition times, being a former building administrator, I can tell you this firsthand, those transition times take class time away. It takes a few minutes to get into the classroom, to get settled, to get cleaned up, and you lose minutes of instruction. So the more transitions you have, the more instructional time you lose. And also we would lose time in the middle of our school day as we transport students to and from school. So that's not impossible, but it poses some challenges for us.
Can parents opt out of social distancing for their child?
I don't think that will be it's certainly going to be a challenge to enforce in school, especially for different age groups. But I don't think we'll have an opportunity to opt out of social distancing. Again, there are guidelines that we are going to have to follow, and there will be some that are recommendations. We just don't have those guidelines or recommendations at this point.
If every student gets a Chromebook and it were to crash or something, would the student be responsible for paying for it?
If it was a software issue and there was no intentional damage, no. All of our Chromebooks will be insured, so we would replace Chromebooks that there was no intentional damage. I think what we're talking about right now is that parents would also have the option to purchase insurance. I think it's $25 a year, and that would cover more intentional damage or drops or things like that. So there'll be an optional insurance offered for parents. But no, if the Chromebook just misfunctions or malfunctions, we would replace that.
I'm not sure what this question is getting at, but it's what about the libraries?
Social distancing maybe in the libraries?
Well, we'll have to ensure social distancing in all of our spaces. Our libraries will still be open. We will have to work with the county health department on how to manage books that are returned. There is some guidance out there about how long the coronavirus can survive on hard surfaces or paper surfaces or those things. So we'll have to work through those procedures, but our libraries will still be open. We still want kids reading books. I'm not sure if there's more to that question.
Keep looking for, did the OT, PT, and speech therapies through school via Zoom and did the same with children's hospital therapies? There was a question about handling special needs kids. I think somebody was answering that. And I want to say a lot of this, there's been a number of people thanking you for doing this and how it's very open and appreciate it and want more of it.
I wish we had more answers for people.
I would just, on a personal note, one of my children is actually on an IEP, and we were very happy with how it went. And we were happy with how it went, again, with 3 to 5 days to prepare. So, and we did have opportunity, he was given opportunities to meet with his speech therapist and some of those things as well. So from a personal note, I can say that we were very pleased with what we received, the services that we received for our student, and we would plan on that to continue into next year.
And I have two children with very different educational needs. Both of mine are now out of school. My daughter just graduated, but I certainly understand that parent perspective, from the gifted student perspective to this perspective of the student with a disability. I've lived it and I get it, and those are valid questions.
Can you talk about possible changes in recess? That was my best subject in school.
Ours too. Mine too.
When I was a middle school principal, we did a construction project in my building, and I had 5th and 6th graders, and we closed down our outside spaces. We had no recess for 2 years, and I will tell you those were 2 of the hardest years as an administrator I've ever had. So we are certainly advocates for recess. As of right now, the good news is that playgrounds can be open. Phase 1, we would be allowed to use our playground spaces. If there was an outbreak, that might have to change. We're looking at some companies who disinfect playground equipment, and it's supposed to hold for 30 days and to keep them safe for 30 days. So we certainly want to make sure, and sometimes that's the best intervention we can provide for a student, is to give them some physical activity. So every intention to do that. It'll be certainly hard to monitor social distancing on a playground, but we'll have to do the best we can.
There's a conversation amongst people about therapists and what they're doing. Will assignments be paperless in light of what has just is just mentioned regarding libraries? How they keep popping in here. Let me get back to. Will all assignments be paperless in light of what was just mentioned regarding libraries? How would this work with younger children that need tactile tools?
I won't say that all assignments would be paperless. I think that we need to do as much paperless as possible for many different reasons, but if there's a need for a paper project or paper assignment, we'll certainly have that.
Same with choir, music class, they have to be standing close, sitting. You can't cancel this stuff due to social distancing. Music was critical to my young life.
Okay.
I guess they're very much a music person. How will kids be addressed if they don't maintain social distancing, or if masks are mandated and they remove them? That's their question. How will we deal with kids that don't do that?
I was kind of joking about this recently. I don't see a situation where we're going to want to suspend students from school for not wearing their mask all the time. So just like anything else, we're going to work with students and educate students about best practice, just as we work with our elementary students about washing their hands after using the restroom or washing their hands before eating lunch. That will have to be a part of what we do, and we'll have to be more diligent about that next year and talk more about that as a staff. But we certainly, we're not in the business of just disciplining students for infractions like that. It's certainly going to be a challenge for our teachers, especially teachers of younger grade levels, to have to talk about and monitor social distancing and other things like that. But
how many days will students be at school and off school if it's blended?
we don't know yet. Again, our goal is to make sure that students are in school as much as possible. We're trying to plan without knowing what the guidance is specifically right now, which is certainly a challenge. We've begun talking about what potential schedules can look like. We just talked about that yesterday, but we don't have any definitive plan yet. Again, it's hard to create a definitive plan when we don't know the parameters we're working within. So I'm anxiously awaiting that guidance so we can get moving.
How are the cuts to the education budget going to affect the ability to provide some of these accommodations?
It's going to be a real challenge. It's going to be a real challenge. None of the requirements sound like it's cheaper to operate schools, and that's a real challenge when we're facing budget cuts. Again, we had $900,000 cut from this fiscal year, which were payments that we were expecting and had already budgeted for as we finished out this school year. So we're not talking about $900,000 in the future. We're talking about, we create school budgets in the summer for the following year and plan to spend those dollars on programs, and we did that. And then we found out at the end of the school year that $900,000 of the funding that we were already expecting was lost. So that's difficult to manage that. We did have some operational cost reductions because of coronavirus. Busing, for example, we weren't busing students, so we did save on fuel costs there, but it certainly didn't offset the $900,000 reduction. So moving forward, as we're making these plans for next school year and talking about staffing online programs or staffing special needs programs or gifted programs or music programs, we at this point have no idea what our state funding is going to look like next year. The projections we're hearing are pretty dire. As people are off work and income tax collections are down, but then there's the rainy day fund and how much can that offset? We sitting here today have no idea what our state budget's going to look like next year.
Just to put things in perspective, $900,000, what's our usual operating budget for a year, just so people know what we're facing?
Approximately $50 million.
Yeah.
Will band camp happen this year?
I hope so. I'll elaborate a little bit. With the current restrictions, I think that's what we're working towards, that it would happen this year. It may happen on site this year, and it may look different. But I know Mrs. McIntosh is working on a plan to have band camp. Just like anyone else, she has to kind of work within the guidelines we're given and see how that works. And again, I want to give a lot of credit to our county health department. They were very helpful as we worked through graduation plans. I thought we did a great job. I heard a lot of great comments from parents about how graduation went. Some actually preferred this model versus the other. But they've been good to work with and flexible as much as possible for us. And they realize as much as anyone that kids have been missing opportunities. It's great to see sports starting back up. So we want to make sure that happens.
Here's a question. What are your feelings on kids wearing masks?
My personal feelings, frankly, my personal feelings don't matter a whole lot. How do I feel about them? I feel like people are, it's a tough question. I understand different perspectives. I understand that some folks feel like, because it's real, that when you think about our buildings and how hot they get and a younger student, it's a real challenge to wear that and to try to monitor that. I know that the thoughts and feelings about the real impact of coronavirus is very divisive for some reason. I know that there are a lot of experts that have a lot of data to support coronavirus, and you read other studies that say quite differently. I think it's true that coronavirus doesn't have the effect on young people that it does on older people, especially those with health conditions, but they're also carriers of the disease. So it's just a hard question, honestly. And for some reason very political these days. There are some folks who don't want to wear them, and some folks who feel like it's their duty to wear them. And we're trying to navigate those waters while just our job is to educate kids.
And we wouldn't be right to tell people they're right or wrong to feel either way.
No.
I think it's slowed down. There are a lot of comments about opinions about kids wearing masks, and that's to be expected. We had at one time we had about 250 or a little more people on. We've got about 175 now, so I would call this very successful. Sounds like there's a request for this to happen several more times, and I think that's your plan.
Yeah.
The battery on my phone that's taking all the questions just popped up and said low battery, so it's about time to wrap it up. Here's one last, you can say it one more time.
Okay.
What will be done about the buses? About busing? There was another question or a comment or a possibility of asking parents to bring their kids to school. That's a possibility.
Many parents, one of the real challenges we have with the start to school next year is the question about busing. Again, right now, the guidance that we're hearing, and again, that guidance is not out yet in final form. But as of yesterday, what I heard was that we were looking at one student per seat on a bus, unless they lived in the same household, then they could sit in the same seat together. In a 72 passenger bus, there are 24 seats with 3 students per seat. So if our busing capacity is reduced by, let's say, half, that significantly makes it significantly harder to get students to school. So I think that's what that question is asking. That's where we currently are with buses.
Here's one more that'll just wind everybody up. Instead of rotating school days and online learning, why can't we look at all year-round schooling and illuminate online learning? It's difficult for parents and students.
Well, there are many things I love about the idea of year-round school. One of the real challenges here in Troy City schools is the lack of air conditioning in the buildings. Both years so far that I've been here, we have had to send students home because we had students with showing signs of heat. I won't say exhaustion, but getting close to that point. So that's a real issue here in Troy as the temperatures climb, especially with the needs for air movement and coronavirus and those kinds of challenges. It's a real challenge.
All right.
So tonight we'll do this again at 7 o'clock. The only way this would be different tonight is if the guidance comes out today, which I'll be watching for but don't really expect. And then we will post this information on our website. We will do this again, especially once that guidance becomes known. That could be this Friday, that could be a week and a half from now. But once that's known, we'll get that out there.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you all for joining, and have a great day.
Go Trojans.